I want to start today with a number that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. If you graduated from college this spring, you are more likely to be unemployed than the average American worker. More likely, not less likely. For about 35 years, it was the other way around. A college degree bought you better odds in the job market. That, in the last 5 years, flipped. And almost everybody wants to pin it on AI. But I think everybody's wrong. And I'm going to tell you why. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Context Window. I'm David Deming, and this week I'm doing something a little bit different. Today, you are the lucky recipient of a solo rant I'm going to call The Kids Are All Right. In my job as dean, I have lots of conversations with students, but I also have lots of conversations about students with faculty, staff, parents, alumni, and other observers of Harvard. They ask me, are the students these days all right? Are they all woke radicals? Can anyone have a conversation or a friendly argument anymore? And I have to tell you, students are doing so much better than you think. They're mostly happy and well-adjusted, and 99% of my conversations have nothing to do with how Harvard is discussed in the news. The students I know are mostly uninterested in talking about politics or protest. They are interested in talking about AI and great inflation, although that is a topic for another day. I learned that the kids are all right, partly by seeking out representative samples from the population in dining halls and other places, rather than relying on only who wants to come lobby me in my office. But I also learned it because my very first speech as dean was freshman convocation. And I decided, for whatever reason, to talk about AI and how it's going to be a really good thing for them in the long run, even if it creates more uncertainty and disruption in the short run. And that led to a whole year of cool conversations with students who want to understand how AI is going to change their lives and the world around us. It's been really interesting to watch the vibes shift on AI from fall to spring. If I had given that same speech at end of year commencement this spring that I gave in the fall, I would have been lustily booed like so many other commencement speakers. What happened? And why did the worm turn on AI? Well, I think it's generational conflict. Students are fed up with self-satisfied boomers, I'm not a boomer, but you get the idea, lecturing them about how they have to adapt to change. They have a sense that the old social contract is being disrupted, that older generations are pulling the ladder up from behind them. And honestly, I think there's some truth to that. Back in 2022, feels like a million years ago, I worked on a bipartisan commission with the Brookings Institution on the left and the American Enterprise Institute on the right. These are two think tanks, and we all got together across partisan lines and agreed that the US government spends way too much money on seniors and not enough on kids and young adults. And this issue is coming up again right now. The wonks at the Penn/Wharton budget model estimated that in the fiscal year 2025, we spent about $6 on retirees for every $1 that we spent on kids. And in per capita terms, it's even worse. It's like 10 to 1. Retirees are getting more than $43,000 per person from the federal government, mostly through Medicare and Social Security benefits. Kids are getting about $4,300 per person, and mostly through SNAP, that's food stamps, and Medicaid and education. Now, it's not quite as bad as it sounds because most education spending is at the state level, and this is the federal budget, but still, you get the idea. Our social safety net was built a long time ago to solve a really serious problem of poverty in old age. Now, people live way longer and work is more sedentary. So seniors are much healthier by the time they turn 65. And that's a good thing. There's more seniors, they live longer, they consume more resources, and don't forget, they are highly reliable voters. Samuel Moyn from Yale has written a new book called Gerontocracy in America, if you want a book-length treatment of this idea. For a long time, the social contract, the bargain that young people made in this country was study hard, do well in school, and you're going to get a good white-collar office job at a good company with some opportunities for growth and maybe a managerial role one day. And now that feels threatened, and I understand the frustration. So how bad is it out there? My one-stop shopping to understand the labor market for young college graduates is a website and a tracker hosted by the New York Fed. It's conveniently titled The Labor Market for Young College Graduates. It has a time series of unemployment, wages, and other indicators, both overall and then by age and education. I encourage you to check it out. I'll include a link in the show notes. The dark blue line on that graph is the overall unemployment rate, which stands at 4.2% as of March. If you're listening and not watching, just imagine in your mind's eye a really boring looking Fed chart, and you're right there with us. Unemployment has risen from about 3.7% in late 2022, when ChatGPT came out, to a little more than 4% today. So sometimes people look at this rise over the last 3 to 4 years and say it must be due to AI. But unemployment in the low fours is historically very good. Some might even say great. As a matter of fact, from the summer of 2007 to the summer of 2017, the overall unemployment rate was always higher than it is right now. That's a whole decade with a worse unemployment rate than we have today. The overall rate has held in a narrow band for about a year now. It's still a low hire, low fire environment, which does make it harder to find work, but it's not exactly an AI jobs apocalypse. But look at the light blue line, which is the unemployment rate for recent college graduates, defined as age 22 to 27. For the last 35 years, the light blue line has always been below the dark blue line, meaning new college grads have always had better luck finding a job than everybody else. But recently, that trend has started to reverse. The new college grad unemployment rate now stands at 5.6%. That's 1.4 percentage points higher than the overall rate. For the first time in history, new college grads are finding it harder to land a job than the average worker. 5.6% is still not bad. It was much worse during COVID and during the slow recovery from the financial crisis between 2009 and 2012. But it feels ominous because it's targeted particularly at young, educated people. So the question is why? And we can debate the causes, AI obviously, remote work, rising interest rates, which, macroeconomics tutorial, rising interest rates increase borrowing costs, which for growing companies like tech firms that haven't started to make a profit yet, makes business much more expensive. The causes are murky, as we'll discuss in a second, but the data are very clear. This is a really bad job market for college graduates. The main suspect in this whodunit is AI, meaning companies, especially big white-collar service companies, that traditionally have scooped up college grads by the dozen. These are companies like banks, consulting companies, tech firms. They could be using AI to replace the rote laptop jockey tasks they used to farm out to new hires. And it's true. AI is pretty good at stuff like writing memos and briefing documents, collecting and analyzing data in spreadsheets, putting together slide decks, writing code. And it's also true that AI is showing up in layoff narratives. The outplacement firm Challenger Gray and Christmas reported 97,000 job cut announcements in May, and they say that AI was cited for a reason in about 40% of those total cuts, so a pretty significant share. But they also report that AI was only cited for 7% of the cuts in January. 7% to 40% is a pretty big jump, which makes me kind of suspicious. And I got to think, if you're a CEO and you haven't made quarterly earnings targets, or costs are growing faster than revenues because you overhired or you picked the wrong growth strategy, it's a lot easier to blame AI than your own incompetence. Don't read too much into the narrative. If you ask someone why they didn't pick you, whether it's for a job interview or you're asking someone out on a date, you never get the real reason why. They say, it's not you, it's me. So people who are doing the rejecting very rarely have much incentive to tell the truth when they deliver bad news. So don't read too much into the narrative. Economists, for better or worse, don't care what people say. We pay attention to revealed preferences, which is the fancy way of saying you learn what people care about by what they choose, not what they say. So a bunch of studies have come out recently that try to figure out whether the slowdown in actual college grad hiring, not just layoff narratives, how much of that is due to AI. And how do you do that? Well, several papers think of the release of ChatGPT in November 2022 as a kind of hinge point. And ChatGPT did acquire 1 million users within 5 days of release, so that's not a crazy supposition. And these papers set up what's called an event study, where you look at some time trend, like hiring of new college graduates, and you ask whether that trend changes around a particular event. There's this paper by a group of economists out of Stanford that used payroll data from ADP, which is a big payroll processing company, to show that employment of young workers slowed down after ChatGPT was released. And it slowed down more in AI-exposed industries like software, technology, and professional services. And that paper got a lot of attention. There have been several others, all using November 2022 as the trend break or the event. And I have to say, I've never really believed those results. Not that the studies are done wrong or anything. I do believe that hiring of new college grads slowed down in the years right after the pandemic. The numbers don't lie. But the timing doesn't prove anything directly. Think of it like a murder case. The order of events comes together suspiciously well, and AI doesn't exactly have a strong alibi. But also, there's no direct evidence that AI is replacing jobs. There's no smoking gun, literally or figuratively. And when you look more deeply at the timing, it just doesn't make sense. In early 2024, I started tracking AI adoption in the US with my co-authors, Alex Bick and Adam Blandon. We put together the first nationally representative survey of AI usage, and we constructed it to replicate the government's current population survey, which is the source of the monthly jobs report, among other things. And we replicated the question order and the wording and the structure and the timing of the CPS and added some questions about AI. And we discovered very high rates of AI usage very early on. In fact, they were so high that we had a hard time convincing people that they were real when we released the results in the fall of 2024, which feels like a million years ago now. But the interesting fact was that while 30 to 40% of workers were already using generative AI regularly, firm adoption of AI was tiny. It was like 5 to 6%, according to some other survey data. And I confirmed in other work that I did with another team of co-authors at OpenAI in a paper called How People Use ChatGPT that most AI usage isn't for the firm, it's personal. It's not directly work-related. So people were using ChatGPT to get advice or solve everyday problems like write me a workout plan, or how do I fix my dishwasher, or draft an email for me to send to my boss. And that's kind of work-related in a way, but it's unofficial. It's on the sly, so to speak. And that's the kind of usage you would expect to make people better off, but not to show up in productivity numbers or GDP, and not to show up in jobs or change jobs in any meaningful way, and certainly not replace workers. And that was the main story with AI throughout 2024 and the first half of 2025. But then Claude Code came out in 2025, first in a limited preview in February, and then to everyone in May. And this marked the rise of agentic tools that automate tasks like software coding. Anthropic's monthly revenue went exponential by the end of 2025. And then OpenAI's Codex started to catch up. And it seems clear to me that future labor economists will be much more likely to use Claude Code as the event in an econometric analysis rather than ChatGPT. So the November 2022 event study timing just doesn't really track. And I recently read a paper by Peter John Lambert and Yannick Schindler, which made a very persuasive case that remote work is the real perpetrator in this labor economics murder mystery. The paper has a lot of complicated statistical analysis, but the main point is actually quite simple. The decline in junior hiring started in early 2022, several months before ChatGPT was even released. And it happened at the same time in all 4 countries in which the authors have data. That's the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia. When ChatGPT came out in November, the share of new hires that are junior had already dropped more than 5 percentage points from its pre-pandemic baseline. And it continued to drop another 4 to 5 points through the end of 2024, when firm adoption was only 5 to 6%, as I said earlier, and agentic AI wasn't even widely available. So the authors run a statistical horse race between work from home and AI exposure measures. And what does that mean, a horse race? Well, they break the data down into occupation, time, state, and country level cells. So, for example, they'll compare the time trend in junior hiring for a low exposure occupation like nurses to the trend in a high exposure occupation like lawyers or data scientists, all within the same state and year, so like the state of Ohio in 2024. Then they make that same comparison for low versus high remote work exposure occupations. And they ask which trend explains the decline in junior hiring better. And they find that work from home explains the data much better than AI. In fact, they put them together in the same statistical analysis, and they ask which one better predicts the decline in junior hiring, like a horse race, where one of them wins, work from home. Thus the terminology. And I love this paper because it asks exactly the right question, and because the answer seems totally obvious after you see it. Work from home was a huge and sudden change. It increased from 5% of all workdays in 2019, just before the pandemic, to more than 60% just a year later. And it's since leveled off, but at 25%, which is a permanent, more or less, 5x increase in work from home in the US. And of course, in information-intensive sectors like professional and white-collar services, the share is much higher. And this remote work paper by Lambert and Schindler tells us the what, it's remote work, but not the why. Why has remote work been so bad for junior employees? And I think we should answer this question by turning it on its head. Why do big finance, tech, and consulting firms hire so many new college graduates in the first place? Is it because Harvard and other schools are teaching them applied business skills? Are we training Excel jockeys? How does a liberal arts education prepare you for the world of work? The answer is that it doesn't, at least not directly. In a perfect world, we're training you not for any particular job, but how to be a well-rounded thinker and how to get better at learning new things. Fresh college grads are smart and adaptable, but no offense, they mostly don't know anything of value when they step into the office. So why hire them? Well, you want to think about a new college grad like a capital investment, where the costs are paid up front and the benefits come later. Let's say you've just bought a house and you're trying to decide whether you should put solar panels on the roof. Bear with me. It's a big upfront cost, several $1,000s, but the benefits are lower electricity bills or even the power company paying you, as my dad recently discovered to his delight. So you drop a few grand right away and your bills are $50 to $100 lower each month, every month. So college grads are like the solar panels, costly, but potentially worth it in the long run. And the question is, how costly and how long is the long run? So in this possibly tortured analogy, companies are the homeowners, college grads are the solar panels that can save you money and make you more efficient, and remote work is like a tree that grows too tall and shades the roof. Meaning, it lowers the payoff to investing because learning on the job is a lot harder from behind a computer screen. Before the pandemic, the physical layout of big offices crammed junior and senior employees together. I found this corporate memo from Salesforce written in 2021, which described their pre-pandemic conditions as big skyscraper offices and a sea of desks. That can be unpleasant at times. It certainly sounds unpleasant, but it's probably good for junior employees because they need dense feedback loops to learn. There's this great paper by Natalia Emanuel, Emma Harrington, and Amanda Pallas that studies software engineers in a Fortune 500 company that shut down during the pandemic in 2020 and then reopened with a return to work mandate in 2023. The engineers were organized into work teams, and some of the teams sat right next to each other in the same building before the pandemic. Some were split between different buildings on a main campus, and some were just fully remote. Again, all prior to 2020. And when the economy shut down, of course, they all went remote. And when they came back in 2023, they came back to their previous situations, right in person, neighboring building, remote. So you can study how work changes and how communication changes in these teams and how it changes in both directions because they went home and they came back. And the all remote teams are like a control group because it was the same for them the whole time. And these authors find that sitting physically near coworkers greatly increases feedback and code comments, mainly in the direction of seniors to juniors. And there was no difference, they found, between the group that worked in different buildings on the same campus and the fully remote group. They were basically the same. And that suggests it really is about close proximity. And they also found, this is the interesting part, that seniors wrote more code from home than in the office because mentoring juniors and providing feedback takes time. So when you're not doing that, you can write a lot more code. And they even the authors rated the code written by juniors when seniors were nearby. And they found that the senior feedback was helpful and it was substantive and it improved the juniors' work in the long run. And so the bottom line that this paper really shows cleverly is that junior employees are just harder to train up when they're remote. They're real cost to doing it, but it works. Now, remember also that 2022 was one of the tightest labor markets in recent history. They called it the Great Reshuffling because quits and new hires were at all-time highs and employers were desperate to keep their workers. So to torture the solar panel analogy further, think about whether you would put solar panels on your roof if you knew you were moving in a few years. We used to joke that when you got a job as junior faculty at Harvard, you better get an adjustable rate mortgage, not a 30-year fix, because there was a pretty good chance you wouldn't be sticking around for the long run. It's the same idea. Not only were junior employees harder to mentor online because of the technology, companies were also really worried that the juniors would leave for a competitor and all that training would be wasted. So the combination of remote work plus a tight labor market and lots of quitting and reshuffling meant that building talent internally started to look less attractive, and buying experienced workers on the open market was, if anything, more attractive because the talent pool was broader. And more research out of this group at Stanford, Barreau, Bloom, and Davis, they showed that in 2019, less than 4% of workers live more than 50 miles from the workplace, compared to 12% of new hires today. And the share is much higher, 20 to 30%, for companies in finance, tech, consulting, and other professional services. So what does that mean? These labor pools got much broader and deeper with remote work. You could hire people nearby, you could hire them from a neighboring town, you could hire them from another country. So with a greatly expanded labor pool, buy on the open market starts to look a lot more attractive than building talent internally. And so once you look for them, these build versus buy dynamics show up everywhere. They're present in lots of other talent markets. One fun example is the old Hollywood studio system in the 30s and 40s. The big five studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, 21st Century Fox, and RKO, they had a monopoly on movie production because it was so capital intensive. It wasn't like you could walk around with a camcorder or an iPhone. There were no other distribution opportunities. And so they were the only games in town. So they could sign big stars like Clark Gable, Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Humphrey Bogart. They'd sign them to long-term fixed wage contracts. So they become stars and they wouldn't be paid like stars. And those are four household names, and they made millions for the studios. But they would also sign lots of other potential stars who didn't end up panning out. And the studios would invest heavily in all of them and give them lots of chances to succeed because they could capture the upside from that investment. So the studio system was pretty bad for the lucky few who became stars after the fact, but it was very good for star making. This is a really cool paper in the Journal of Law and Economics a few years ago that studies what happened to this talent market when two big court decisions unraveled the studio system. And they found that once movie contracts became project-based rather than long-term, you couldn't exploit talent anymore. You had to pay the stars like stars, which meant the studios had to take on more risk because they had to recoup their investment. So they relied much more on established names who were box office draws, and they stopped taking so many chances on unproven talent. Another example of build versus buy dynamics, if you're a sports fan, is how the transfer portal has changed college athletics. Schools like my alma mater, The Ohio State University, can acquire players now who succeeded at other schools through the transfer portal. So they don't need to develop talent internally. They have less incentive to recruit at the high school level. Blanket, Ohio, and recruits don't stick around as long. They're buying instead of building. And finally, of course, remote work left a paper trail that AI could pick up pretty easily. Tacit office routines that everybody understood but nobody ever wrote down became customer service tickets, shared documents, Slack threads, pull requests, data dashboards, CRM platforms. That was already happening before the pandemic, of course, but remote work made it necessary for survival. And you see this right away when you study corporate communications to shareholders around 2020. Lots of language like multi-year program to modernize our technology infrastructure and becoming a digital-first organization. That's from a JP Morgan shareholder letter. Not to pick on them, there are lots of other examples. The point is that digital first went from slogan to business necessity in March 2020. And a side effect was that it codified a lot of white-collar work and made it machine readable. In the Substack post I wrote last week, I called this the containerization of office work. And that's because cargo shipping, back in the day, used to be a mess. Goods were crammed into ship holes in crates or just loose, which was a haphazard and highly labor-intensive undertaking. But then in 1956, an American trucking tycoon or magnate or whatever monopoly word you want to use, named Malcolm McLean, started using equally sized metal boxes to ship anything and everything. It sounds simple, but containerization, meaning standardizing the form and size of shipping containers, allowed them to be easily moved, routed, stacked, and tracked. Over time, that made shipping much easier to automate because the process was predictable and codifiable. And that's a requirement for automation. You can't have loose ends. And even frontier AI models, they're just highly sophisticated pattern matchers. And they can't match what they can't see. So just like shipping containers standardized everything and made it predictable, remote work forced companies to standardize previously bespoke office routines that weren't codified anywhere. Now, here's the part of my rant where you say to me, well, that's nice, Deming. We can understand the past a bit better. And your analogies are cute and all that. But ultimately, what difference does it make whether AI or remote work are to blame for the collapse of the white collar career ladder? The fact is, it happened, and AI's here, and it's going to make it much worse. But it does matter, I think. And here's why. Based on the job market in 2026, you might think that AI is somehow inherently biased against junior workers. And I'm going to put a marker down right now. I think that's wrong. I think it's a temporary state, and we're going to look back on this time, and we're going to see that very clearly. Sure, AI can do a pretty good job replacing the most rote white-collar tasks, the data cleaning, the memo writing, and PowerPoint prep. But that was never the value proposition for junior hiring anyway. That was the training grounds. The real value was developing future senior management and leadership, and they will still need to do that. In fact, it's going to be even more important in the future when managers need to understand how to use AI. Almost 70% of ChatGPT adult usage globally comes from people ages 18 to 34. Only 14% of users are above the age of 45. Do you really think that a technology that is so heavily used and understood by younger people who are smarter and more flexible and more willing to learn new things, do you really think that technology is going to harm those young people forever and ever? It just doesn't add up. We think AI is always going to be good, just good enough to replace new college grads, but not quite good enough to replace upper management? No. And just remember, today is as bad as AI is ever going to be. I think a better analysis is that the big corporations that aren't hiring juniors now are holding back because they can't quite figure out how to adapt. They have legacy capital invested in old ways of doing things. They're trying to just plug a cheaper AI solution in where a new college grad used to be, but they are eating their seed corn. They're dinosaurs, and we all know what happened to the dinosaurs. New technologies often lead to new organizational forms and structures. Electricity changed the organization of the factory floor because it could easily be distributed. With steam and mechanical power, you had a giant steam engine or a water wheel at the middle of the factory with machines organized centrally around it. Electricity changed all that. It allowed electric motors, small motors, to be attached to each machine. And then machines and work could now be distributed and more organized like a production line. And it took factory operators decades to figure that out. But once they did, it changed work forever. And I think something similar is going to happen with the way work is organized around AI. I don't know what it is. We're just in the first inning here. I don't know what it looks like. But I'm pretty darn sure that it will not exclude young people. It might even make them more important. They're certainly going to understand AI better than dinosaurs like me. There's this great paper I read by Hyunjin Kim and Rem Koning. It just came out recently. It's called AI Native Firms. They use data from Y Combinator, which is probably the most prominent incubator of startups, over the last few years between 2020 and 2024, and they link it to labor market data from Revelio Labs. And they find that these AI native firms are smaller, they're more expert, and they have flatter organizational forms. They're not traditional hierarchies. And this isn't just because they're new. The paper compares AI natives to non-natives by time since founding and finds that they start smaller, but they also stay smaller. They're about 25% smaller than comparable non-AI startups. And you might say, okay, that means fewer jobs. We're out of work forever. Except there's also evidence that AI makes entrepreneurship easier. And indeed, there has been a boom in the creation of new companies since the pandemic. So it could be more companies, but smaller companies, and that's kind of unclear how that nets out for total jobs. But the more interesting thing about the paper is that these AI native firms have more engineers and experts, and they have fewer managers. And in fact, they have fewer and flatter layers. It's less hierarchical. So it's early days. This is the first paper to really look at this systematically. But I think the companies of the future might be more expert and more creative, maybe smaller, and less hierarchical. And as I said in my convocation speech to Harvard freshmen last year, disruptive innovation in the past has always favored ambitious and talented young people because they can adapt to new ways of doing things. I believe the future belongs to the kids, and the kids are going to be all right. Okay, before I let you go, a little housekeeping. People ask me sometimes, why am I doing this podcast? I do have a day job, after all. Dean of Harvard College is a pretty busy job. It's a pretty interesting job. And I definitely have my hands full, maybe more than full. And my answer, though, is I just really enjoy doing it. It's fun. I'm not trying to go viral or be an influencer. I'm happy to make content that I like, and hopefully you like it too. And honestly, it's gone better than expected. We are already in the top 5% of podcasts in terms of weekly downloads. So thank you all for listening. I really appreciate your support. And there is actually a method to my madness. Recording these does two good things, one for me and one for you. First, it gives me the discipline to do my homework. It's a commitment device. I could shoot the breeze with any of these guests for 45 minutes and have a great casual conversation. But knowing that a lot of people are going to hear it forces me to prepare. And the conversation ends up being much deeper and better. These are conversations I want to have anyway. And so recording them gives me the discipline. And that's a good lesson for college students or anyone really who wants to learn something. Set up a commitment device. It could be a podcast or a reading group of friends or enrolling in a course, whatever it is. A lot of what we do in universities is we build an infrastructure and a community to help you commit to learning hard things. The second thing is I get to share it with you, and maybe you learn something too. Win-win. We've already gotten some great feedback. I say yeah too much when people are talking. I think I fixed that, but we pre-recorded a bunch of episodes, so you might hear it again a few times. Sorry about that. Also, some people think I talk too fast. Guilty. Guilty as charged. People have been telling me that for years. It used to be worse, believe it or not. Getting older and slower has helped me a little. But the truth is, I just get excited, and the mind starts racing, and the mouth tries to keep up. I'll try to slow down, but also maybe just put it on 0.9x if you want. I usually listen to podcasts at 1.5x for what it's worth, so maybe that's the problem. The voices in my head are sped up too. The other piece of feedback was that you want to hear a little more from me about what I think. And honestly, that's not really my instinct. I'd rather listen more and talk less because when I'm talking, I'm not learning. I already know what I think. But you asked, so today you got a whole episode of it. I want to cover more of this stuff anyway. Economics, jobs, higher education, AI, teaching and learning. Same logic of commitment. Read the papers that I want to read anyway, and then record to keep myself honest and share them with you. So this was an experiment, and I really want to know whether you liked it, didn't like it, or just didn't care. Email me at david@thecontextwindow.com. I am eager to hear your feedback. Next week is a very special episode. I'm sitting down with journalist and famed biographer Walter Isaacson. He's written about Benjamin Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, and more recently, Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, and Elon Musk. We're going to talk about his new book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, which you can think of as a biography too, not of a person, but of a document, the Declaration of Independence. And more specifically, its second sentence. It's short, the book is short, it's great, and it's timely as we approach this country's 250th birthday. This episode airs July 1st, right before the 4th. See you then.